in order to illustrate this, what I'd like to do is do a live demo with y'all today. You can get the example code here from GitHub. It's in this repository here. I've got the link as well as the QR code if you want to quickly scan it on your phone. The code I'm going to show is going to be a Cypress project using the Applitools Eyes SDK for those visual snapshots. And we're going to test a very simple banking website, capture 2 snapshots, and then we'll see how visual testing can work. Even though I'm using Cypress here today, note that we can integrate with any test automation tool, framework, or language that you're using. I chose Cypress because it's the most popular one we have at Applitools, but we can do Selenium Java, Playwright, Puppeteer, you name it, we support it. Let me show you the app we're going to test, and then I'm going to show you the tests that we're going to write. Here is our basic banking application. You could even load it yourself on your own machine. It's at demo.applitools.com. What I want to do is perform a basic login for this test, or for this app, and that's what we're going to test today. So the first step would be load the page. Ta-da! We're here. Second step in our test would be to visually inspect the page to make sure everything looks good. So if I'm looking here, I want to make sure it's got that logo at the top of those 2 circles, login form, username, password, sign-in button, social links. And manually, visually inspecting all this looks good. My third step is going to be to perform login. Now, I can type in any username or password because this is a dummy site. I'll just, pretend like I'm doing it for real. Click the sign-in button. And so then the final step of our test is going to be to visually inspect this page to make sure that everything appears as we expect. Now, this page is much more complex. It's got a lot more fields. It's meant to look like a bank. And so, at the top bar, we've got search field, account page. We have a sidebar with different kinds of account types. On the main part of the page, we've got total balance, credit available, payments due today, as well as a table of our recent transactions. Right. So let's see what it would take to test this application. I'm going to pop into my project code here. And so this is going to be in JavaScript. I'm using Visual Studio Code as my editor. And there are really 2 ways we could write this test. The first way would be what we would call the traditional approach, just using Cypress and JavaScript, no visual AI component. And so I have that test's code here. I've called it traditional.js. And it looks pretty much like any other Cypress test. If we look at the code here, I've got my describing the traditional test for the Acme Bank. Oops, sorry. I'm setting a viewport size 1600 by 1200, just keep a big screen. Then my test case, it should log into the bank. We're going to go through those 4 steps in automation that we just stepped through exploratorially. First step is a CY visit with the URL of the page. That brings it up. Then to perform the verification on that page, what I've done here is I've written 5 lines of assertions where I'm just checking the existence of 5 elements on the page. The logo, username, password, login, and the one of the little social links. And all I'm checking is to make sure they should be visible. Now, that's 5 lines I had to write. And these assertions, they're decent, but they're a little bit weak because there's things we didn't check on the page, right? We didn't check the login title. We didn't check the exact placement or the colors or anything. Third step would be to perform login, typing username and password and clicking the button. And then the fourth step, to check that main page, requires a lot of assertions if we're doing this traditionally. Here, I'm again checking the appearance of various elements on the page, things in the sidebar, things like some of those titles. I'm checking that message at the top saying your branch closed in so many minutes. And then I have to do some even more complicated assertions here with checking menu element names and transaction statuses. I mean, there's some loops going on. This gets pretty complicated. I probably spent about half hour, 45 minutes writing out all these assertions, figuring out the proper selectors, finding that my selector was wrong and going back. So there was a tediousness to this development. And still, it doesn't cover everything. I only picked a few elements on the page to check. Yet we have order of magnitude 100 lines here. If we were to rewrite this test using visual assertions with Applitools, you can see that in the visual.cy.js file. And this one's going to look very, very similar to the previous one, but it's going to be a lot more concise. So again, I have my describe section. In my before section, what I'm doing is I'm going to call Applitools eyes to open my eyes, saying I'm beginning a session for the test where I'm going to be capturing snapshots. Then we have pretty much the same test. It should log into the account. The first step, loading the page, is identical, right? Interactions pretty much stay the same. But the second step, instead of explicitly making certain assertions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, capture a full visual snapshot of the entire page. And that's this eyes check window. I can give it a name so I know how to look it up later in the dashboard, which I'll show in a second. I'm targeting the full window, so I'm capturing everything in one line. And what this will do is it will capture this and upload it to the Applitools eyes server. Third step, again, it's an interaction. This is the same, performing login, typing username, password. But then all those dozens of lines for those assertions on the main page, again, can be replaced by an Applitools eyes snapshot. Why? Because one snapshot covers everything on the page. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a snapshot is worth 1,000 assertions. And so here I'm going to name this one. This is the main page. Again, I want the full window. And to help with my matching a little bit, I'm going to use a layout match level. Just in case there's some text that's a little different. I don't care too much about that. I want to make sure the whole spread of the page is good. And then at the end of the test, I want to make sure I close my eyes to say, we've gathered all the snapshots, visual AI, do your thing. So it's basically the same test. It's just one is supercharged with visual assertions backed by that visual AI. So I'm going to run this Cypress test here. So npx Cypress open. This will open the typical Cypress window, which we can click through and we can actually watch it run. So I want end-to-end testing. I'm running using the latest version of Cypress, Cypress 12. You can pick your browser locally, and that's cool. So I'm going to start, I'll just use Chrome here. And now the Cypress window is open. I'm going to run the visual test, and we'll see, hands off the mouse, is going to run it automatically because it's automation. So there it's loading the page, took a snapshot, perform login, boom, capture that snapshot. So locally, the test passed. Now what we need to do is we need to check our visual snapshots. I'm going to then now go up to the Applitools dashboard. I already have an Applitools account that I use my API key in the tests. And so if I refresh to see my latest tests, we can see this is the batch of tests that I just ran. Okay. Now remember, I ran it once locally on Chrome, but here in the Applitools eyes dashboard, it's actually run it multiple times. You might be like, well, what's going on here? What I have done is I've configured it to run not just one time for visual snapshots, but across 5 different browser configurations in Applitools Ultrafast Grid. So here I've run this snapshot, this particular one, I've run it on a Pixel 2 device, a mobile device. This one down here, I've run on Chrome running on Linux. This one here, I've run on Safari on Mac. Now, I didn't run that locally on my machine. I only ran the test once. What Applitools does is with these snapshots is every time you capture a snapshot of a page, when it gets sent up to Applitools Ultrafast Grid, it gets re-rendered on whatever browser configurations you want. It's actually a much more efficient way of doing cross-browser and cross-platform testing than repeating runs on your local machine. You run once, Applitools Ultrafast Grid runs it X number of times. And so here with the snapshots that we have, we can take a closer look. We see we have both the login page and the main page. And if I open this up here, we can see that's kind of, tall and narrow like we would expect a phone to be. And these are establishing what we call baselines. This is the first time I have run this test. And so it's establishing a baseline to be the good starting state. so that all future tests will check against these baseline images. And that's why you see the status where they're green and they say new. It's saying, hey, we captured a new snapshot. If I look at another one, say here was the Linux on desktop, you can see how this snapshot is different from the one that we run on the Pixel device, right? It's a little bit wider. The formatting's a bit different because this app has responsive web app design. So it's going to be rendered differently depending on the device or the viewport you have. That's why it's very important that you test you test your pages against different platforms and devices because they respond differently. And that's why it's even more important that you test visually, because the visuals are the things that primarily change with responsive web design. A traditional test like the one that we saw earlier would not be able to capture the essence of those differences. All right, so we've run our test once, we've established baselines. What I want to do next is I want to run this test again without making any changes. And what we should see is that Applitools Eye should be able to recognize with a visual difference comparison that with no changes on the page, that the snapshot should be the same, and we should see passing test results. So I'm going to rerun the test. I can just click the refresh button in the Cypress app. And so it runs through all the steps again. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. So now the test has run. Let's go back to that dashboard again and see what happens. So if I refresh, we should see, aha, there's another batch. It's running. Doesn't take too fast along. It is the ultra fast grid. So if we just refresh here, give it a moment, we can already see some of the tests are coming in. And so here, let's see this one. This was that Pixel 2 device that we saw before. Here, this one's marked as passed. So if I open this up, I can see what the snapshots are. And if I drill into a specific snapshot, we can see the baseline on the left. That was the one we just captured, the good starting state. And now we have what we call the checkpoint snapshot, which is the latest and greatest one that we just captured from our recent test. And because Applitools does not see any differences between these two, it automatically marks this visual test as passed, which is good, meaning, no visual differences detected. We didn't break anything. Woo, we can continue development in peace. So if we wait for all those results to come in, everything passed, and that's good. Another thing I want to draw your attention to here is this batch duration. Notice how this was only 21 seconds. The first one also took 20 seconds. Ultra fast grid is ultra fast. If we were to run these tests locally, serially one by one, that could add up very quickly. But with ultra fast grid, you can run them all in parallel, do all your visual snapshots. I mean, essentially, we have 10 tests here. We have 2 snapshots across 5 different browser configurations. And that all finished in 21 seconds. That's averaging, about 2 seconds per snapshot? That's really good. If you've got test suites with hundreds to thousands of tests that take, they could take minutes, hours, even days sometimes. It's very important to be fast with your execution. So let's be a little bit devious now. We've seen what happens when the test is passing, but there's another version of our application that injects a visual bug or a visual difference. Index v2.html. We have a second version of our demo app here that has some visual differences. You've got a broken icon here, as well as the sign-in button became a login button. So let's go back into our code and use this page instead of the original one and see if Applitools detects the differences. So in my visual test here, I want to change the hyperlink, and we'll save that. And so Cypress should reload our test. And automatically, because Cypress is awesome, it detected the change of the test code. And so now it automatically reran our test. If I switch back to the dashboard, we should see another batch. And we'll give it a moment here, but what we should see is something different happening. Uh-oh, bum, bum, bum. What happened? our tests are in a state of unresolved. Let's take a look at one of these. We can pop the first one off here. So what Applitools Visual AI does is it detects visual differences, right? So if we open up here, the main page didn't have any changes. So that was still marked as green passing. But the login page had visual differences. Let's inspect here. When we open the comparison, we can see highlighted in magenta what those differences are. We can see it's the login, or it's the icon here, and then this row where the sign in button and the remember me checkbox were. Now, the reason why Applitools marks it as unresolved is because it needs you, as the human tester, to determine is this a good change or a bad change. I mean, as a matter of course of development, things change, right? Not all changes are bad. Sometimes you might make an update to your front page, or you might change a sidebar or something, and those are acceptable. So when Applitools detects a change, it needs you to tell it good or bad. And then it will remember that for the future. So let's figure out what's going on here. First thing I want to note is, okay, to me, it looks like down here with the sign in button and the remember me checkbox, I don't think the remember me checkbox changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this option up here called hide diffs caused by element displacement. Sometimes if one element changes, it displaces another one, and that gets marked as a difference. So if I check this, it can drill in more carefully to the actual images or the actual part of the visuals that have changed. And this is something that your pixel-to-pixel comparisons without a tool like Visual AI cannot handle. So here now we can see, when we hide element diffs caused by displacements, the remember me checkbox is no longer marked as different. That's because it is essentially the same. It just went boop a little bit to the left. What is different is, like we said before, the icon and the login button. So that's cool. Now, it's one thing to see that something is different, but it's a more important question to ask why. What happened here? Why is this broken? That doesn't make sense. I don't recall why that. I don't know what changed here. What happened? What we can do next is something called root cause analysis, and we can do that entirely within the Applitools dashboard. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this, click this button here for root cause analysis, and that opens up a side pane. Now what I can do is I can click on elements in my page, and we can see the CSS and HTML code that was behind the scenes that caused that visual difference. So here, when I clicked on this image, we can see originally it was using this particular image link, image logo big.png, but then in the changed image, it started using this image broken image.png, and that is the nature of the problem. So here we can see, I know why that one is broken. So what we can do then is we can take this information, I'm just going to copy it to my clipboard, and I can drill into this particular item here with an annotation. I can say, hey, there's a bug here. That's this exclamation point. And I can drag this over here to identify this element and say something, give the bug a name, broken icon. And then I could even make comments to say something like, here's why. And then give the before and after to document exactly why this is happening, so that a developer could then pick this up and say, this particular snapshot has this particular issue, and this is why. So now that I know that this is clearly a failure here, I can mark the snapshot with a thumbs down to say this is a failure. And what you'll see at the bottom here is, even though I had 5 different tests, what Applitools will do is it will look at the other similar variations and see if that particular visual failure appears there. And if so, it will automatically mark those as failed as well. It's part of your automatic regression maintenance. so that you don't have to click failure 5 times explicitly. Applitools uses this visual AI not just for the visual diff of comparison A to B, but also to see and find similar failures in the rest of your test suite. That helps you as the tester be more efficient with your time. So it doesn't capture everything. So here I'm probably going to need to do a few more. We'll say that's a thumbs down. And again, it's going off seeing if it can find anything else. And see that one, I didn't touch, it automatically did it. And so, oh, it's resolved all steps. Let's close this. So you can see, even though I had to give only 2 explicit thumbs downs, it identified the rest of them as similarly failed. So I'm going to save this. By saving it, Applitools knows that, hey, anytime we see those failures again, we will automatically mark them as failed to begin with. And anytime we would have that fixed, then we will automatically mark them as passing again because the issue has gone away. So that's really, in a nutshell, how visual testing with Applitools works. Now, there's a bunch of stuff we could get into that I don't quite have time for, but what we could, just to show you briefly, we could filter our test results based on different criteria. There's also something called Contrast Advisor that's really nifty. Testing for accessibility. Accessibility is a big thing because you got to make sure that your app is accessible, or else you're in violation of different laws and ordinances. So what we can do is we can check the contrast of different parts of your page to make sure that they pop out enough so people with vision disabilities can still see and interact with your page. And so here, if we bring this up a little bit, we can see a few places where the contrast may have failed according to accessibility standards, and to actually see what the actual contrast is versus the expected contrast. And we can see this on all the different places that have issues. Some are going to be worse than others, like this one versus that one. You can see different scores there. Applitools also has built-in capabilities for managing different baseline images. So let's say you're doing A/B testing and you're pushing out 2 or 3 different versions of the same page. You can set multiple baselines so that doesn't mess up your regression tests when you run your test suites, right? Otherwise, you'd constantly be battling, oh, this one's different, this one's different. You can handle that with the platform. You can test multiple different browser configurations. You can have multiple different test suites running, different batches. So there's a lot you can do with the power of visual AI and Applitools. So again, if you want to run that code yourself, feel free, check it out. You can get it from GitHub. We covered a lot in our demo. Just to quickly recap, we looked at what a traditional test looked like and replaced those traditional assertions with full page visual snapshots. Again, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, snapshots worth 1,000 assertions. We took baseline snapshots to start and then checkpoint snapshots for every subsequent test. We were able to render those snapshots on different browsers and devices, even ones that we did not have on our local machines. We could view the results on the dashboard and perform root cause analysis. And we could even check accessibility with our Contrast Advisor. So all this is really cool stuff. It's powered by visual AI, a real world application of AI looking at images and being able to find things in them like they were human eyes. Now you may think this is really cool, but what's even cooler is this is just the beginning of what we can do with the power of AI and machine learning in the testing and automation space. What we're going to be seeing in the next couple of years is a new thing called autonomous testing, where not only are we automating our tests, but we're automating the process of developing and maintaining our tests, such that the tests are kind of almost writing themselves in a sense. And visual AI is going to be a key part of that, because if testing is interaction and verification, what we want to make autonomous is both interaction and verification. And visual AI has already made verification autonomous. So we're halfway there, folks. It's real cool stuff.